Some still talk about the strange pebbles found along the shores of Lake Ohrid, nestled between North Macedonia and Albania. Perfectly smooth, unnaturally cold, no matter the summer heat. But the strangest thing, they say these aren't just rocks. For 20 years, Stefan had walked the shoreline every morning, a retired clockmaker whose life was defined by the steady, rhythmic ticking of gears and the meticulous order of his own routine. He had come to the lake to find silence after the long, hollow years following his wife's passing, a space where he could finally be alone with his memories. He'd always been drawn to the peculiar. One day, his fingers brushed against something distinct amongst the regular shingle. It was a sphere, flawless and dark, chilling to the touch. Even under the bright Balkan sun he picked it up. A strange pull, a flicker of something almost unseen at the very edge of his vision, urging him. Not a sound, not a thought, but a deep, irrational compulsion to keep it. His pocket grew heavier, each new stone but he couldn't stop. Stefan found himself drawn back to the shore, an unacknowledged urge pulling him day after day. He didn't question it, not truly. He simply obeyed, gathering more of the perfectly spherical pebbles. Their unnatural cold radiated through his fingertips, a persistent chill that never quite left him, even hours later. Soon, they lined every windowsill, filled every vacant bowl in his small cottage by the lake. Each one felt like a small, frozen heart, silent and unnerving, yet he couldn't stop bringing them home. The fleeting shadow, that dark, peripheral smudge he'd previously dismissed, now clung to the edges of his vision with alarming consistency. It was a ripple in the air, a subtle distortion of space, always just beyond focus, always gone when he fully turned. The pebble was only the beginning. A sound began. Faint at first, a whisper, almost indistinguishable, yet undeniably there. It carried the ghost of a familiar cadence, a voice like a loved one's memory. It's nothing, he told himself, but the words felt hollow, a desperate attempt to rationalize the growing unease. A cold dread settled in his chest, convinced he wasn't alone. Something was listening. Stefan was a creature of habit, and his home, a sanctuary of order. He had just cleared the last crumb from his kitchen table, leaving the antique wood gleaming. So when he returned moments later and found it there, a chill ran down his spine. Resting in the exact center, a perfectly spherical pebble. It was obsidian dark, smooth beyond belief, and impossibly cold, just like those he collected by the lake. But this one shouldn't have been here. He stared at it, his mind scrambling for an explanation. He reached for it, then hesitated. What happened next made that seem insignificant. As he turned to the living room, a flicker crossed his vision. The doorway, an archway he'd passed 1,000 times, wavered. For a split second, it wasn't his modern living room beyond. It was older, dimmer. The wallpaper faded, the furniture unfamiliar, covered in ghostly white sheets. Then, it snapped back, his own familiar space returning. The air in the room seemed to drop several degrees. He realized the cold. It was seeping into the very walls of his home, pooling in the shadows, growing stronger, as if something vast and unseen had begun to truly settle in. Stefan had finally had enough. One evening, under the low, brooding sky over Lake Ohrid, he stood at the shore and began to throw the smooth, perfectly round pebbles back into the dark water. Each faint splash was a whisper of defiance against the growing strangeness. He watched them sink, feeling a momentary, fragile calm. This peculiar obsession, this endless gathering, It felt like an anchor dragging him down. Yet, when he re-entered his quiet house, the cold, flawless stones were waiting, not just in a pile, but meticulously arranged on his windowsill, precisely as he'd found them that morning. A prickle of ice ran through him. A new consequence. How long had this collection truly consumed him? Weeks dissolved into months, then years, a fluid, unsettling passage of time he couldn't quite grasp. His own memories twisted, contradicting themselves. And then, a phantom thought, had he always lived alone here? A fleeting image of another face, another laugh, shimmered at the edge of his awareness, then vanished. Just then, the sound originated distinctly from the locked basement door, resonating through the floorboards. It was a childhood nickname, one he hadn't heard in decades, his own. But the basement was empty, always empty. His heart hammered, a frantic drum against his ribs. The voice called again, softer now, yet chillingly insistent. The collector clutched his small recorder, its red light blinking against the dimness. He pressed record, aiming it at the pervasive silence, hoping to capture the presence he felt. On playback, only harsh, unyielding static grated through the speaker. But then, the static began to twist, to warp, resolving into something sickening. Distorted fragments of his anxieties, thoughts about the cold pebbles and the lake, echoed back, mangled and horrifying. The true horror arrived later. A voice, impossibly familiar, thin and strained, emerged from the digital noise. One he had loved and lost, whispering, "Please, don't look anymore. Just stop." The collector stumbled back, dropping the device. His breath caught. He rushed to the window, needing an anchor to reality. It was barely midday, yet a burning, impossible sunset bled across the entire horizon. Each pebble seemed to contain an impossible sound, like distant thunder, trapped beneath stone. Fiery oranges and deep purples painted. Stefan stumbled through his home, the cold clinging to him now like a second skin. He found himself at the basement door, heavy oak. But when he forced the old lock open, the sight beyond was utterly alien. His storage shelves were gone, replaced by a dusty, sprawling collection of antique furniture he'd never owned, yet somehow recognized. A rusted, intricate clock, a child's rocking horse, faded and worn, pulled at a memory he couldn't grasp, a past that never was. He thought that would be the worst of it. But then things got worse. From behind what should have been the solid, exterior basement wall, he heard them. Voices, his mother's sharp laugh, his father's booming argument, woven into a complex, layered tapestry of conversations with people he knew, people he loved. He pressed his ear against the thin drywall. The sounds were so real, so vivid, yet when he burst outside to investigate, there was only the silent, empty side of his house, cold under the moon. Back inside, trembling, the man found a new pebble but this one pulsed with a faint, internal cold light, casting ghostly shadows across the room. The man tried to leave. The front door, once a simple passage, had become a cruel, impossible jest. He opened it, stepped into a narrow, unfamiliar hallway, walked its length, and pushed open the door at the far end. He found himself back in his own living room, facing the same worn armchair, the same shelves laden with pebbles. Each loop, something felt subtly wrong. A new crack in the plaster, a thin film of dust where there had been none before, or a pattern on the wallpaper unnervingly altered. He tried again, and again. Each time the air grew heavier, the silence deeper, more suffocating. A more profound terror began to settle then. He tried to scream his own name, to ground himself, but the sound caught in his throat. What was his name? It was gone, replaced by whispers, familiar and strange, calling him by childhood nicknames. Little Pebble, Stone Boy, Deep Diver, voices from nowhere, yet everywhere. They echoed in the space where his identity used to be. Then he noticed the pebbles, the countless perfectly now a faint rhythmic tremor passed through them. A silent hum felt deep in his bones. They sang, not with sound, but with an unsettling pressure against the air, pulling him further into a waking nightmare. Stefan found himself before the bathroom mirror, drawn by an invisible compulsion. His eyes met his reflection, but a profound, sickening unease settled in his gut. The reflected eyes weren't looking back at him. They were fixed, dead and empty, on the static smudge stubbornly clinging to the far corner of the tiled wall. It was a distant, inhuman stare. As the man watched, horrified, his reflection's lips began to move, forming silent, grotesque words he did not utter, words that twisted into a grimace of agony, a silent scream of something ancient and terrible. It was as if another will now inhabited his mirrored image, a cold, alien presence, acting completely independently. He tried to speak, to call out, to articulate the raw terror seizing him, but the sound that escaped his throat was not his own. It was a cacophony of thin, mimicked whispers, a chilling chorus of unfamiliar voices, echoing forgotten pleas, and half-formed cries from some distant, forgotten shore. Not his thoughts, not his skin felt unnaturally cold. A deep, pervasive chill that sank to his bones, precisely like the perfectly spherical pebbles he had been collecting from the dark waters of the lake. The house had become a living, breathing labyrinth. Rooms now appeared and vanished, defying every law of architecture, every memory of where a wall or a door should be. A hallway might stretch impossibly long, then twist into a familiar kitchen that was never there before. Yet the man moved through it all without a flicker of surprise. The pebbles on the floor began to shift, sliding across the wood with a sharp, dry rasp. They weren't just clattering, they were arranging themselves into jagged, complex geometry, the distinct, swirling shapes of cyclonic storms. Every window in every newly formed room looked out upon the exact same sight, the raging surface of Lake Ohrid, not the gentle lapping they remembered, but a furious, churning storm, waves crashing white and high, even when the actual sky outside was perfectly clear. The mimicked voices were simply there, an incessant hum within his own mind. He no longer fought them. All he did was gather, placing each new pebble into the grove. The passing fisherman, whose net dragged heavy in the dawn, found his gaze snagged by an unnatural stillness on the shoreline. There, at the water's edge, stood the man, perfectly motionless, a figure carved from the very stone around him. Not a breath stirred his tattered clothes, not a muscle twitched in the cold morning air. In one hand, held with an unsettling rigidity, was a single, impossibly spherical pebble, smooth and dark against his pallid skin. The man's eyes, even from that distance, seemed utterly vacant, like windows opened onto a void. But then, in the shimmering reflection of the lake's calm surface, directly behind the man's unmoving form, a faint, distinct smudge of static pulsed. The cottage behind him, once a refuge, now leaked sounds into the quiet morning. From within, a chilling cacophony flowed, faint, insistent whispers curling through cracked window panes, followed by brittle echoing laughter from unseen corners. And most unsettling of all, woven into every sound, was the distinct, ceaseless rumble. He merely observed the water, a silent, empty vessel, now a permanent, unchanging sentinel of the lake.